5 minutes ago, the walls of Buckingham Palace trembled not from an earthquake, but from a seismic royal decree. King Charles III has made the final call about Queen Camilla. No more speculation, no more delays. What did the king decide? Why now? And what will this mean for the future of the monarchy? Brace yourself. This isn't just news, it's history rewriting itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Within seconds, the palace gates transformed from their usual stillness into a storm of chaos. A frenzy of flashing phones, murmured guesses, and faces frozen in disbelief marked the beginning of a moment no one could prepare for. Journalists who had spent years reading between the royal lines now stared at a 23-word statement issued by the palace press office. Short, cold, and final. It didn't clarify. It didn't comfort. And most disturbingly, it didn't name Camilla directly. That absence, deafening in its precision, triggered a tidal wave across the nation. Within minutes, Camilla decision ignited across social media platforms, sending the digital world spiraling. Every royal watcher, every palace insider, every headline-chasing journalist scrambled for answers. The whispers started before the echoes of the announcement had faded. "It's irreversible," one aide muttered, pale and visibly shaken. Another refused to comment, eyes downcast, as if the truth was too dangerous to speak aloud. This wasn't a misstep. It wasn't a leak. It was intentional, deliberate, final. Parliament was caught off guard. The royal liaison team, usually briefed days in advance, was left out. Ministers checked their phones mid-session, brows furrowed, pulses racing. The final wording embedded in Charles's statement raised constitutional questions too explosive to ask aloud. Was it an abdication of trust? A reshaping of royal hierarchy? Or something far more personal and painful? No one could tell, not yet. The monarchy's famed silence, which once commanded reverence, now stoked unrest. The absence of explanation became its own kind of statement, a shadow that stretched across every newsroom, every dinner table, every loyal heart. And while the world speculated on what this decision meant for Queen Camilla, one truth pulsed louder than the rest. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in titles or traditions, but in the very soul of the monarchy itself. Something broken was being buried or perhaps exiled. But to understand the magnitude of this final decision, we must travel back to the shadowy beginnings of this royal entanglement, the alliance that was never supposed to happen. Long before thrones and titles, it was just Charles and Camilla, two souls entwined in a love both magnetic and catastrophic. But behind palace curtains, their connection was condemned, suppressed, and ultimately severed. Or so the world thought. In the early 1972s, their paths crossed, not as figures of royalty and scandal, but as two young hearts drawn to something neither fully understood. Their bond was instant, undeniable, and devastatingly real. But in the eyes of the monarchy, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Camilla, charming and unapologetically confident, was not the fairy tale fit the royal advisors demanded. She lacked the aristocratic purity, the moldable meekness, the air of reverence they insisted a future queen must possess. And so, behind closed doors, judgments were made. Unfit, they whispered. Unsuitable, they warned. Queen Elizabeth never raised her voice, but her silence cold, calculated, and final was a blade sharper than any decree. The message was clear. Camilla could never wear the crown. What followed was a slow execution of their bond. Pressure mounted. Expectations suffocated. Charles was steered toward royal duty, toward a life he never fully chose. And Camilla, pushed to the periphery, made a decision that would haunt them both. She married Andrew Parker Bowles. A reluctant union that served the monarchy's agenda, but shattered what remained of their unspoken vows. Yet love, especially the forbidden kind, doesn't vanish. It lingers, it festers, it transforms. Charles wrote letters, tortured, aching, and utterly private. Pages soaked in regret and longing, never meant for public eyes. But years later, Those very letters would surface, revealing not just emotion, but a man at war with his crown. The pain of their separation didn't end with time. It evolved into bitterness, into rebellion, into something far more dangerous, a desire to reclaim what was stolen. And through it all, the palace tried to maintain control, to sanitize the narrative, to erase what it deemed inconvenient. But no matter how deep they buried it, the truth refused to stay silent. Because this wasn't just a love story. It was a mutiny disguised as affection. It was two hearts trying to survive a kingdom that wouldn't allow them to breathe. And though years would pass, titles would change, and public opinion would shift, the scar of that first heartbreak never truly faded from Charles's eyes or from Camilla's silence. Yet fate has a cruel habit of circling back, and what the palace tried to bury would rise again, darker and more unstoppable than before. She was radiant, beloved, and utterly unaware of the war she had stepped into. Princess Diana's entry into the royal family ignited a silent battle, one fought not with swords, but with secrets, tears, and quiet sabotage. From the outside, it was the perfect fairy tale. A young, shy kindergarten teacher plucked from obscurity to marry a future king. The world watched in awe as Diana walked down the aisle in a dress spun from fantasy. But beneath the lace and smiles, something deeply unsettling brewed. That wedding day was not a beginning. It was a cover-up, a distraction. Because even as Diana said, "I do," the man beside her still hadn't let go of the woman who wasn't there. Within months, whispers began to circulate. Charles had resumed contact with Camilla. What was once buried had quietly resurfaced, not with scandal, but with precision. Phone calls, notes, glances at official engagements. Camilla was never far, always near enough to feel, but just out of reach to accuse. Diana, at first, brushed away the signs until the signs started cutting deeper than denial could numb. Alone in golden palaces, surrounded by people yet starved of true companionship, Diana began documenting her despair. The world saw her as a princess, but behind closed doors, she was crumbling. Her private recordings revealed a woman suffocating under the weight of public worship and private rejection. She spoke of cold silences, of eyes that once looked through her as though she wasn't real. And still, Camilla lingered in coded invitations, in brief encounters at polo matches, in cryptic nods during receptions. Never formally acknowledged, yet ever present. Hiding in plain sight. Diana felt it. The press hinted at it, and Charles, caught between crown and heart, refused to sever the cord. The moment of no return came not from a scandal, but from a whisper into a microphone that echoed through the soul of the nation. In that now infamous interview, Diana laid bare the truth that royal courtiers had tried desperately to contain. There were 3 of us in this marriage. And in those 9 words, the castle walls cracked. Loyalty, once considered noble, now looked like betrayal. Charles's devotion to Camilla was no longer just a private matter, it became a public wound. A betrayal felt by Diana, but witnessed by millions. The monarchy, built on image and illusion, struggled to maintain composure as its internal fractures spilled into daylight. Diana's growing popularity only intensified the tension. She was the people's princess. Camilla, by contrast, was the shadow cast. Over every photo, every speech, every crown-polished event. Charles, meanwhile, drifted bound by duty to Diana, but tethered by passion to Camilla. And in the chasm between those 2 women, the future of the monarchy trembled. When tragedy struck in a Paris tunnel, it wasn't just Diana who died, it was the monarchy's illusion of unity, and Camilla's shadow loomed darker than ever before. Most would have vanished into scandal and shame, but not Camilla. With calculated poise and palace backing, she began a slow, stunning transformation from mistress to monarch in waiting. This was no accident. This was war by charm. In the wake of Diana's death, as the nation grieved and the monarchy reeled, Camilla disappeared. Not from Charles's life, but from the public eye. It was a silence drenched in strategy. Behind the scenes, she remained close to the man who had defied tradition for her, but in the public square, she became a ghost. That distance, however, wasn't retreat, it was repositioning. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Camilla's image began to shift. No longer the villain of a royal triangle, she re-emerged in whispers. Visiting hospices, attending literary charities, always low profile, always humble. Every appearance was choreographed, every quote softened. She wasn't trying to replace Diana, she was recasting herself entirely. And the palace was in on it. Royal advisors knew public redemption couldn't be forced. It had to be earned through subtlety, patience, and time. A Camilla softening strategy was drafted. Avoid controversial topics. Steer clear of overt glamour. Focus on empathy. Reinvent the narrative, 1 inch at a time. Even Queen Elizabeth, once privately disapproving, began to shift. Her public gestures were brief but unmistakable. A photograph, a shared appearance, an invitation. Not endorsements, but acknowledgements, each one a thread, sewing Camilla's presence deeper into the fabric of the family. The Queen's silence, where once it had exiled, now quietly allowed. It was enough. The media, ruthless, unpredictable, began to follow suit. The tone changed. Tabloids that once crucified her began to use words like resilient, misunderstood, survivor. Headlines that would have sparked outrage a decade earlier now slipped beneath the radar. The public, still skeptical, grew more resigned. Scandal fatigue set in. The outrage dulled into weary curiosity. And in that space, Camilla thrived. No longer hiding, she began to walk into rooms as Charles's companion, not his secret. And Charles, for the first time, didn't flinch. He didn't ask permission. He didn't seek approval. He defied tradition. When the moment came to announce his intentions, he did so without negotiation. Camilla would be queen consort, not duchess, not princess, queen. The final word, consort, wasn't enough to dilute the declaration. It was bold, it was deliberate, and it was irreversible. But for every nod of royal approval, there was a price. Not everyone was ready to accept this new chapter. Not the public, not all within the firm. And perhaps, just perhaps, not even Charles himself, because the deeper Camilla moved into the heart of the monarchy, the more something began to unravel. Not in the press, but in the people closest to the crown. But behind the smiles and silks was a festering resentment within the public, within the family, and within the king himself. They chanted in the streets, burned her portraits, and booed at royal events. For millions, Camilla would never be queen. They didn't just oppose her, they rejected the king who insisted on her. The moment Charles took the throne, the fault lines that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted with volcanic fury. What should have been a unifying moment for the nation became a lightning rod for outrage. As royal banners were raised across the kingdom, protest signs rose higher. While church bells rang in celebration, chants of dissent echoed louder. The people hadn't forgotten Diana, and they hadn't forgiven Camilla. In poll after poll, the message was unmistakable. Overwhelming majorities believed she had no right to be queen. Not in name, not in spirit, not in memory. The monarchy had underestimated the public's pain, and now it was paying the price. The backlash was immediate and merciless. At a charity event barely weeks after the coronation, Camilla's convoy was struck with eggs thrown not in jest, but in fury. She didn't flinch, but inside, something cracked. The woman who had spent decades rebuilding her image now found herself trapped in a new storm. And this time, charm was no shield. Online, the fury was relentless. Hashtags demanding her removal flooded social media. Petitions soared into the hundreds of thousands. Every gesture, every smile, every tiara became ammunition for public scorn. No matter how carefully crafted the palace's narrative, the resistance wouldn't fade. It grew. It evolved. It spread like fire. The queen consort had become a symbol not of continuity, but of betrayal. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was no better. Leaks began to trickle from once loyal staffers. Whispered accounts of Camilla's emotional strain, her retreat from internal meetings, One aide even described the Queen Consort as crumbling behind the curtains, and Charles, torn. His heart belonged to the woman he had fought so hard to bring into the light, but his crown was now anchored to a nation that refused to accept her. His advisors were no longer united. Some urged resilience, push forward, stay the course. Others begged for retreat, reconsider the title, protect the monarchy. The clash wasn't just political, it was personal. Decades of emotion, defiance, and loss had led to this moment, and now it was unraveling in real time. And yet, through all the noise, one terrifying reality loomed. The king himself was beginning to question everything. Not out of regret, but out of exhaustion. Because even a monarch has limits, and when the institution you're born to serve turns cold, when the people you vowed to lead turn their backs not just on your consort, but on you, what choices remain? And just when it seemed the storm had passed, an unthinkable betrayal behind palace doors shattered everything. He was the heir to the throne, and the son of the woman Camilla replaced. Prince William had stayed silent, until now. And when he spoke, the palace held its breath. For years, William maintained the image of unity, a royal shield protecting tradition. But behind that practiced smile was a reservoir of pain, confusion, and suppressed fury. That reservoir finally cracked when private letters meant only for his father were leaked to the press. The headlines were volcanic. "She'll never be my queen," William allegedly wrote. The words weren't political, they were personal. A son drawing a plaith, line in blood. Camilla was not just a controversial figure to the public, she was the wound that never closed within the royal sons of Diana. And now, the elder was ready to speak for them both. In public, the tension was palpable. Shared events became cold choreographies. Camilla and William barely exchanged words, and when they did, it was rehearsed, hollow, strategic. Photographers caught the glares. Commentators noticed the distance. The body language said what no statement ever would. And yet, the real storm didn't erupt in front of the cameras. The private royal summit, summoned in haste, was meant to extinguish the fire. Instead, it set the curtains ablaze. What began as a family conversation turned into something far more visceral. Doors were slammed, voices were raised. Charles, caught between the woman he had fought for and the son he had raised, found himself crumbling under the weight of legacy and loyalty. William's words were not appeals, they were ultimatums. "You're rewriting history," he told his father, "and erasing hers." But William wasn't alone. Kate, ever the composed Duchess, stood firmly at his side. And when she spoke, it was not as the future queen, but as a mother, a wife, a woman who knew the dangers of a divided dynasty. She urged Charles to reconsider, not for headlines, not for harmony, but for survival. The family couldn't carry both the weight of Diana's ghost and Camilla's crown. One would break them. The other already had. Charles, visibly aged by the ordeal, retreated from the confrontation. But retreat didn't mean peace. In the days that followed, his inner circle fractured. Some demanded he hold firm, insisting the crown must not bow to personal grief. Others begged him to listen to his son, to the people, to the echoes of a queen that never was but always remained. In the chaos, something else began to stir. A legal advisor, buried in the archives of royal protocol, discovered a clause long forgotten, one that hadn't been invoked for over a century. A clause that could change everything. But it wasn't just his son forcing the king's hand. A buried royal clause would emerge, forcing Charles into a decision that would echo through history. Hidden deep within royal legal archives was a forgotten clause, one that no monarch had triggered in over 150 years. But now, as pressure mounted, it surfaced like a ghost with a crown. They called it the Sovereign's Conscience Clause, a relic of a bygone era when kings ruled not just with ceremony, but with swift, secret authority. It was obscure by design, buried in the folds of royal protocol, shielded from public view, and locked within an ancient section of the royal charter. But when Charles's advisors stumbled upon it, they realized its power was both terrifying and tantalizing. It allowed the reigning monarch, under moral duress, to revoke a consort's royal status without parliamentary debate, without cabinet involvement, and most importantly without public announcement, just a signature, and the crown could be erased from any name it adorned. The last time it was used, Queen Victoria had exiled a scandal-plagued duke with one stroke of a pen, sparking whispers but no revolt. The clause was deemed archaic, its relevance long gone. Until now, as Charles found himself torn between bloodlines and backlash, between duty to Diana's memory and loyalty to Camilla's presence, the clause reappeared like fate's final offering. According to palace insiders, it was Charles's personal legal advisor who placed the document in front of him, late one evening, after the Balmoral confrontation had fractured the royal family beyond repair. The king allegedly said nothing for several minutes. Then, he asked only one question: is it binding? From that moment, speculation took on a life of its own. Had he signed it? Was the title already revoked in secret? Palace aides refused to comment. Official schedules were cleared. Camilla continued her royal duties, unaware that behind the same palace walls where she had fought to belong, discussions were unfolding that could undo everything. The most trusted inner circle kept their silence, but subtle shifts gave them away. Charles grew distant. His public speeches leaned toward reconciliation, and at a garden ceremony, where Camilla stood beside him, one observer noted the king's hand trembled slightly as he lifted her arm. Rumors swirled. The press began asking pointed questions. Sources close to the royal household hinted that the clause had not just been reviewed, it had been prepared for activation. The document, they said, sat inside a leather case on the king's personal desk. Signed? Unclear. Intended? Absolutely. And yet, Camilla remained in the dark. Whether by design or denial, she carried on, speaking at charities, smiling through pain, walking toward a future that may already have been rescinded behind her back. The air around the monarchy thickened. Every glance, every omission, every reshuffled appearance schedule fed the mystery. What began as whispers now pulsed through every hallway of Windsor like a secret waiting to detonate. All roads now led to one final moment behind sealed palace doors, where Charles would speak the words that would change everything. No cameras, no aides, just a pen, a signature, and the heaviest heart in the kingdom. King Charles has made the final decision about Queen Camilla, and it's not what anyone expected. After weeks of speculation, legal murmurs, and emotional implosions inside the firm, the palace finally released the statement that confirmed what many had feared and others had demanded. Camilla would no longer carry the title of queen. Effective immediately, she would revert to princess consort, a designation once floated in the early years of their union, now resurrected as a compromise between love and legacy. The language of the announcement was precise, formal, and eerily devoid of warmth. It acknowledged the sovereign's personal judgment and cited historical precedent. But between the lines, one thing was undeniable. A throne had chosen its survival over sentiment. What the world didn't see, however, was the letter. Handwritten by the king himself and delivered behind closed doors, it was a private farewell cloaked in public diplomacy. In it, Charles poured out years of conflict, heartbreak, and guilt. Sources close to the palace say it read like both an apology and an admission that the love he had fought for could no longer be defended against a crown that refused to forget. Camilla, once silent in her rise, now vanished in her fall. She left Windsor that same evening, her departure swift, her destination undisclosed. Her team refused interviews, her security detail was tripled. And for the first time since Diana's funeral, there were no cameras waiting. The reaction across the nation split like a cracked mirror. Some cheered. To them, it was justice late, but delivered. Others mourned, not just for Camilla, but for what the decision represented, the monarchy's endless surrender to ghosts. Outside the palace gates, flowers were left not for the king, but for Diana. Old photographs surfaced. Hashtags merged timelines. William and Harry, estranged by geography and grief, reportedly exchanged private messages for the first time in months. No statements were made, no joint appearance followed, but insiders claimed the tone was different, less guarded, more human. A pause in the war, if not peace. And then came the sight that few expected. Charles, alone in the royal chapel, lit 3 candles. One for duty, one for sorrow, one for Diana. He said no words, he bowed no head. But those who saw him said he looked not like a king but like a man who had chosen the crown, and in doing so surrendered his heart. The decision had been made. The ink had dried. But the cost? That could not be measured in ceremony or silence. Not now. Not ever. But even as the ink dries, whispers rise from the palace halls. Because some say, this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. The monarchy has shifted, lines redrawn, trust shattered. With Queen Camilla cast aside, the House of Windsor now stands at a crossroads, and beneath its polished surface, new fractures are forming. The silence after the storm was brief. In the absence of the Queen's crown, a vacuum had formed, and power never leaves a void for long. Behind the regal curtains, the palace entered survival mode. Camilla, now princess consort once more, vanished from public view. But those close to her whispered of a woman not defeated, but calculating. Would she retreat quietly into the background, or return with her own reckoning? For a figure who had clawed her way to the top of an empire that once exiled her, silence was rarely the final chapter. There were murmurs, faint but persistent, of letters exchanged with publishers, of memoirs half-written, of secrets still sealed. Meanwhile, the spotlight shifted, and it burned hotter than ever. William and Kate, long seen as the stable heirs in waiting, suddenly found their roles fast-tracked. The public, exhausted by drama, looked to them with desperate hope. Every speech, every smile, every photo was dissected. They weren't just the future anymore, they were the monarchy's last defense. But pressure creates cracks, and even the golden couple couldn't escape the weight of everything that had come before. Charles, though still king, felt the crown grow heavier with every passing hour. Polls showed dwindling support. Questions were asked, not just in tabloids, but in Parliament. Was this monarchy still fit to lead? Was the institution itself beginning to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions? Across the Atlantic, Meghan and Harry, once exiles, now influencers, broke their silence in the only way they know how: strategically. A cryptic message posted from California sent shockwaves through royal observers. Truth is never lost, it just waits. What did they mean? Was it directed at Charles, at Camilla, or at the system that had pushed them to leave in the first place? The ambiguity was the message, and it landed like a dagger in every royal PR strategy meeting. Then came the most unexpected twist. A name from Camilla's past, long buried, long forgotten, resurfaced. Not a scandal, not a love affair. Something different, something darker. Reports suggested this individual had information, real information, the kind that could reshape public perception, not just of Camilla, but of the decisions made behind palace walls. What had she sacrificed? What had she endured? And what had been kept hidden not for dignity, but for control? In the end, this wasn't just a reckoning for one woman or one king. It was a reckoning for an entire dynasty. The House of Windsor had made its choice, but the cost of that choice was still being tallied across generations, continents, and consciences. The headlines had moved on, but inside the monarchy, nothing had settled. The crown still gleamed, but it no longer blinded the world. It was now a mirror, and the reflection staring back was fractured. The decision has been made, but the consequences? They've only just begun to unfold. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.